Hello there, Ben Bowers, the Spirit Specialist, and this is the accompanying video that goes with the New Kids on the Loch Summer 2022 edition of the sample selection pack that contains some miniatures of a number of new and limited edition releases that have come out in the last couple of months. You might have already come across the Spring 2022 edition, the first one that I did of this, and this is kind of an irregular ongoing selection box that as new things come out and limited edition things, where in some cases I might literally get one bottle, as is the case in here. It means that basically rather than one person getting the bottle, maybe flipping it if that's what they want to do, it means that I can get at least 20 people to actually be able to try the stuff and enjoy them, and hopefully you can let me know my thoughts as well. So in this box we have GlenWyvis Batch 2, we've got Nc'Nean Huntress, Ardnamurchan Paul Lenoir release, the 2022 edition, the Wireworks Small Batch, the Filey Bay Peated Finish Batch 2, and then Ardbeg Ardcore, which I literally got one bottle of, so it's being shared with you lovely people. There is also, and I'm going to put my fingers over the code so that you can't actually use it, a £5 off voucher of your next purchase, any purchase as well, doesn't even have to be anything related to this. Not that you'd be able to get a Paul Lenoir and an Ardbeg in particular, because I'm already out of those and I'm very low on the rest as well. But if you're wanting a bit of background information about these, if you want to know a little bit more, what I've done, because I've done a video review for all of these, so I'm basically going to collate them and also cut in essentially my tasting notes, just to kind of give you background information behind the distillery and also kind of what's gone into the bottle. And then if you want, you can also watch my little tasting notes as I was doing each video. Don't take them as gospel, they're my personal thoughts. You might feel completely different about them, and that's absolutely fine. But sometimes it's nice to have somebody else's thoughts just to kind of give it a bit of context, or if it gives you some ideas, or if you disagree entirely, then let me know and we can have a conversation about it, and it'd be really interesting to know your thoughts, because we're all different and we all like different things. So they're in the box in a running order if I was going to do a tasting featuring all of them in the course of a couple of hours. So if you did want to, of an evening, go through all of them. Now remember, they've got lids on, so you don't have to drink the whole thing. You can have maybe a couple of sips out of one of them and then maybe go back to it later on once you've tried all of them. Or if you want to go through over the course of a week or so and do one a night or anything like that, that's also absolutely fine. What I will do is in the show notes, I will put the times of each individual section so that you can jump straight to that. And if you want to do it in a completely different order, not a problem at all. So without further ado, that's not right. Without further goodbye, that doesn't make any sense at all. Without further ado, I think is the phrase. Let's crack on and let's get the information and my tasting notes about GlenWyvis Batch 2. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the box. And if you like it and you want more of them, let me know, and I'll see if I can get something sorted out. The GlenWyvis Distillery is based on the edge of Dingwall, a small town 20 miles north of Inverness. It was founded in 2015 by John Mackenzie, a farmer, green energy advocate and helicopter pilot who was inspired by the history of former nearby distilleries Ferrintosh, as referenced by Robert Burns himself, Nc'Nean and GlenWyvis, the latter two both closing for good in 1926. A crowdfunding appeal in July 2016 raised £2.5 million from 2,456 investors, mainly local, in just 77 days. And in 2017, building commenced on the new distillery, which was the first in the world to be 100% community owned, along with also being powered by 100% green energy. Distillation of both gin and whisky commenced in 2018 under the initial leadership of distillery manager Duncan Tate, who had previously worked at Nc'Nean, Loch and Mortlach. His retirement from the industry in August 2020 saw Matthew Farmer take over the reins. Moving across from America to take the role, Matthew was born and bred near Inverness and thus can be considered a local lad. The inaugural single malt whisky was launched in December 2021, with this second release being a batch of 23 casks of 3-year-old spirit from 15 first-filled Tennessee whiskey barrels, 5 first-filled Oloroso sherry casks, and 3 refilled hogsheads, which had already matured unpeated Scotch whisky from another distillery. However, as these casks were sourced from a local cooperage, it's not known which distillery this is from. There are 8,000 bottles available at an ABV of 46.5%, with no colour added or chill filtration taking place. So really interesting story behind the distillery. I really like the fact that they're going very much this community-based one. But obviously the proof's in the pudding and the eating and the drinking of what the actual liquid's like. Now, there are, as said earlier, there's a lot of new Scotch whisky distilleries that are starting to launch their first and second early bottlings. So we've got Ardnamurchan, we've got releaes, we've got Nc'Nean, we've got one I've not done yet, which is King's Inch, which I think is sourced from somewhere else. Lindores Abbey, all of these new distilleries, and pretty much in the main, they've all been absolutely fantastic. So, you know, the pressure is on for these other new distilleries to kind of reach that bar that's been set. So let's see how we get on. Quite pale, there's no colouring added on this, so you're looking at, you know, people that are bothered about colour, which I personally am not. They might be going, oh, it looks a bit light and everything like this, but let's go with the nose. And straight away, a lot of fruit. There's sort of green apple there, but it's a golden delicious apple rather than Granny Smith's. I'm getting a little touch of banana. There's a hint of tropical fruit in there as well. There's a sort of mango-y papaya. Yeah, definitely papaya, but I'm getting like a little hint of particularly bananas. But yeah, kind of ripe banana. Again, golden delicious apples, that slightly softer, slightly sweeter green apple feel, but very, very fruit forward on the nose. There is a sprightliness to it. There's a touch of spice in there as well. Not quite chili flakes, but it's not quite sweet cinnamon either. It's sort of a medium spice feel that's on the nose, but light, refreshing, inviting. It does quite remind me of things like Nc'Nean and even a touch of the Filey Bay as well. There's that fruity feel, maybe not quite as creamy as something like a Filey Bay, but it's very much a light, fresh, another kind of spring-like whiskey. Really inviting on the nose though, really, really enjoying that straight off the bat. Right, let's see what it tastes like. And again, that fruit absolutely carries on. Touch of white peach in there. So white peach, again, apple, but a little bit softer, almost like a lightly poached pear feel. Not caramelized, not tart tatin. It's not quite as kind of sweet as that. It's very much a poached pear that's been poached in. There's a slight wininess to it as well. There's a hint of a sort of like an off-dry white wine, almost like a Riesling. There's definitely a grapey element in there, and yeah, maybe getting a little bit of that on the nose, but there is a sort of a fresh white grape juice. Maybe not wine, but more like a pressed grape juice than anything else. That prickle of what I was saying was spice on the nose, I think it's the youthfulness of it. So we're only looking at a 3-year-old here. And it's giving an effervescence in there, but it's actually working really well with that fruitiness. It's not too dissimilar, weirdly, to the Ardnamurchan Paul Le Noir that I reviewed at the time of recording, literally yesterday morning. There's kind of similar elements in here. There's that kind of grapey wininess, that kind of slightly off-dry white wine. There is a slight sparkling feel to this as well. It's not as intense as the Ardnamurchan, but it's very much along those lines. It's, again, fruit forward. It's another one of these new distilleries that's really very fruit forward, but this is more of a kind of a light white fruit, for want of a better word. Having said that, as I'm talking and I'm starting to get the finish, which is lingering very, very nicely, it's actually starting to move from white fruit to red. I'm starting to get notes of strawberries, maybe not quite raspberries, maybe kind of almost like raspberries in cream, maybe like an Eton mess type feel, but strawberries very much so. We go from sort of apple, poached pear, white peach, and it moves into more of a red fruit, but we're not looking at sort of the deeper red fruit elements that you might find on something like, say, the releaes. This is much more of a kind of a, not quite summer pudding either. It's very much fresh raspberries. There's a little touch of creaminess in there. Again, that kind of fruity creaminess, maybe not as citrusy as Filey Bay, but it's got those elements of kind of fresh fruit and a touch of cream and a little hint of kind of like soft citrus, but maybe more like orange peel than lemon and lime. It's again very refreshing. It's light. It's very spring, and this is a spring and summer whiskey, absolutely. I think the youthfulness actually works really well. It's lifting the flavours up, and it's actually giving everything a bit of a a bit of a bite, but in a very good, well-balanced way. There is still quite a creamy mouthfeel through this as well. I'd love to know where the distillery was that they sourced those Scotch whisky casks from, because I do wonder how much of an influence that is creating on it. But as a kind of introduction to what GlenWyvis, I can't bloody remember already. As an introduction to what GlenWyvis is kind of doing, I think it's got enough character of its own that it kind of stands out, but you could potentially group it in a set of new distilleries with Lindores Abbey, with Nc'Nean, in terms of that slightly light. I think you can throw Filey Bay in that mix as well. That kind of light fruit, white fruit, refreshing, spring-like. It would work even slightly chilled, although some people I'm sure are watching going, oh God, what, how dare you type thing. But you know, a very, very refreshing whiskey. Probably works really well on a highball as well. I think this is very, very good indeed. I'm really, really impressed with this. I'm thoroughly enjoying drinking it, which is the most important thing. When I don't bang my teeth against the glass. It's a delicious whiskey. There is lots going on in there for something that's still quite light and delicate. There's a lot of character to it. There's a lot of complexity. Things are sort of moving around each other in terms of the flavors that are within it. The finish is good. It's a nice, it's not massively long, but you know, the flavors do continue. And as I say, they do evolve from that kind of white fruit to red fruit. Very, very interesting indeed. It might be a little bit kind of light and delicate, too light and delicate for some people who want something with a bit more body, a bit more backbone, a bit more oomph. That's fine. That's not a problem at all. There is plenty of whiskies out there with that kind of flavour profile that will float your boat. It's one of the fantastic things about whiskey and spirits as a whole. There's pretty much something out there for everybody. Not necessarily, but one of the fun things is they're all different and they're all offering different things. But great whiskey. Really, really impressive. Particular bottling. The Nc'Nean Distillery sits on the Morven Peninsula on the west coast of the mainland of Scotland, overlooking the Isle of Mull. It's the most westerly distillery on the mainland, but it only just claims that title as the nearby Ardnamurchan distillery comes very close. The distillery itself was founded by Annabel Thomas, who after a road trip around various distilleries in Scotland left her job as a consultant in the City of London in 2013 and began setting up an eco-conscious distillery on her parents' farm in the Drimmin estate, with distilling commencing in March of 2017. It's the first fully organic distillery powered by 100% renewable energy. The wood chips for the biomass boiler are sourced from a local forest, all byproducts are recycled as plant and animal feed for the estate, and even the bottles use 100% recycled glass. In July 2021, Environmental Strategies verified the 2020 carbon footprint for the distillery as net zero, making it the first Scotch whisky distillery to do so, which itself is an achievement 20 years in advance of what the Scotch whisky industry as a whole aims to hit. The name Nc'Nean is a shortening of, well, Nc'Nean, who was the Queen of Spirits in Gaelic legend. She was a huntress, but also a fierce protector of nature, and the use of her name emphasises what Annabel and her small team are trying to achieve. Nc'Nean single malt is bottled in batches, and detailed information about each batch can be found on their website. So far, each batch has used a combination of 65% shaved, toasted and recharred red wine casks and 35% ex-bourbon barrels. Huntress is the inaugural release of a seasonal series exploring Nc'Nean's pursuit of new flavours in whisky making. In this instance, the trial of fermentation using a yeast that was commonly used in rum production proved incredibly successful, resulting in a limited number of 4,447 bottles being released of whisky that was originally distilled in August 2018 and matured in a batch of 61% STR red wine casks and 39% ex-bourbon casks for 3.5 years before being disgorged on 3rd of March 2022. It was bottled at 48.5% ABV, and as with all Nc'Nean releases, no chill filtration took place and no colour was added. So 48.5%, so not cask strength, but they have gone for a slightly higher ABV than you might expect, just to kind of get that balance right between the sort of the ABV level and also the flavour profile that's in there. Now Nc'Nean has, every Nc'Nean I've had so far has been light, sprightly, youthful. They do bottle it quite young, and I know for some people they kind of want it to be older, but it's very much a house style of Nc'Nean, being this kind of light, youthful whiskey, very fruit forward, but there's also that sprightliness to it as well. You know, they make no bones about the fact that, you know, they don't market it as a cocktail whiskey, but they do kind of talk about, you know, essentially a Scotch and soda, a highball, as the kind of house pour almost. So it's, you know, for some whiskey drinkers, you know, more traditional whiskey drinkers that kind of want that, you know, oh, I want it smooth and all, whatever the hell smooth means. But, you know, this has more zinginess, it's got more youthfulness than some people would like. But I actually really appreciate the fact that they're not just going like, oh, we're going to put it in a first fill sherry cask, we're going to make it really rich and fruity, and you've got to drink it on its own, you know, don't put it with ice, blah, 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 blah. Annabelle and the team are very much kind of like, look, play around with it, have fun with it. You know, we just want to make a really good drinking whiskey that will drink well neat and will also work with cocktails as well. So, the Huntress, this limited edition that they've done. So on the nose, and what I'm trying not to do is look for a rummy element, even though the yeast that has been used has normally used for rum production. But kind of knowing that, I can't help but kind of subconsciously look for rummy elements. But there is a really nice fruitiness in here. And whereas sort of standard Nc'Nean tends to be a bit more kind of like green apple, kind of very fresh orchard fruit, this feels a little bit softer. And there is a little hint of tropical fruit on here as well. There's a little bit of mango and passion fruit, but it's still quite light and fresh. It's not the sweetness there, but it's not a sugary sweetness. It's a light, zingy sweetness. Not quite citrusy though, but there is a light tropical fruit element. There is a touch of citrus coming through, kind of like lemon and lime, but it's not a sharp citrus fruit. But loads and loads of fruit going on here. There is there's apples coming through, there's pears, there's tropical fruit, there's a little touch of citrus. It's very fresh, it's very spring summery. It's, you know, this already, and this is at room temperature, it feels summery almost. Right. And that really continues on the palate. And there is that youthful, not pepperiness, but that youthful kind of almost sparkle, effervescence in the mouth. But that tropical fruit note that's in the nose really comes to the fore. And I don't want to say it's got a slightly rummy element, but it kind of does. And I'm not saying this is a whiskey for rum drinkers or anything like that, but there is a marked amount of tropical fruit notes going on in here. There is mango, there is papaya, there is a touch of passion fruit. There is this sweetness in there, and it's slightly sweeter on the palate than it is on the nose. But it's offset by the youthfulness, which actually still gives it a little bit of bite and a little bit of zing. It's really almost refreshing. It's quite mouth-watering. It's quite juicy on the palate. You know, if you eat kind of like a really fresh mango, there's even a touch of pineapple in there as well. Like a really juicy piece of pineapple or a really juicy piece of mango, and your mouth is watering with it. It's very, very mouth-watering indeed. But there is that slight bite at the back of the throat, obviously depending on how you swallow, but it actually lifts everything. It makes it not too sweet. It makes it actually balanced really, really well. This will make really good cocktails. I'm very, very tempted to try this in something like a Mai Tai. I think there's enough sweetness in there and enough tropical fruit notes that will work in a cocktail. It's a fantastic whiskey. It's really, really good. And it's different enough from the standard bottling that I can see exactly why they've done this as a kind of a limited edition. This is taking Nc'Nean in a slightly different direction. So if you like light whiskies, if you like tropical fruit whiskies, if you like tropical fruit, if you do like rum, this is definitely, you know, dare I say, if you like rum and whiskey, this is actually almost kind of a combination of the two, but in a very, very good, very well balanced way as well. I highly recommend this. Now,
the Ardnamurchan distillery is the most westerly distillery on the mainland of Scotland, sitting on a remote 50 square mile peninsula with a single track road being the only access in and out. The distillery itself was opened in 2014 and is owned by Adelphi Distillers. Jamie Walker founded Adelphi in 1993. His grandfather Archibald was previously an owner of the Loch Adelphi Distillery, which opened in 1826 on the banks of the River Clyde. The business was eventually purchased by Keith Falconer and Donald Houston in 2003, and it was in 2007 that the first steps were taken to open a brand new distillery, as demand for Scotch whisky began to indicate it would be harder to source casks independently. Ardnamurchan produces both peated and unpeated spirit, using natural colour and no chill filtration.
Champagne Paul Lenoir is a young wine producer based in Le Mesnil-sur-Orge, 150 kilometres east of Paris. Created by husband and wife team Julien and Sarah Lenoir, they were the third generation of a family selling grapes to a village cooperative, who then decided to produce their own champagne, with their first vintage being released in 2015. Already growing a great reputation, Paul Lenoir partnered with Ardnamurchan to supply a number of 195-litre wine barriques, into which unpeated whisky distilled in 2015 and originally matured in first-fill ex-bourbon barrels was re-racked for a period of finishing, but the exact timescale of that finish isn't known, although it's assumed around 6 months or so. 2,661 bottles were released at 57.5% ABV, with no colouring added and no chill filtration taking place. The Paul Lenoir. Now, I sadly missed out, as I said earlier, on the first release, and I never got a chance to try the first release either, so I don't really know kind of what to expect from this. I'm just expecting something a bit different. So let's go straight into it. Let's go on the nose. Light, very fruity. There's a touch of honey on there, but there's apples, there's kind of almost overripe, no, not overripe, underripe banana. Yeah, that's slightly, it's not quite turned yellow yet. Underripe banana, but there's apples. There is a kind of grapiness in there as well, like a white grape note. There's a spiciness to it as well. There's an underlying soft spice note of definitely cinnamon, but quite dry cinnamon, not a sweet cinnamon feel. And it smells quite juicy. It's a very unusual nose. Quite light, clearly no smoky element on there at all. But it smells light and fresh, but still kind of warm, with that orchard fruit note that's coming through there as well. Just that little touch of spice is just lifting everything, making everything a little bit interesting. Okay, let's see what it's like on the palate. Now, this is bottled at cask strength, so we are looking at 57.5% ABV. Oh, blimey. That is quite hot. That is... This instantly for me is, I'm thinking, I'm definitely going to need to add some water to this. There's a very much a heat going around my mouth. It's very alcohol forward. Now, there is underneath that a continuation of what was on the nose. There is this, it's a very, very fruity, but it's quite, there's a sweetness to it as well, but it's not sweet fruit. So there's apples, but they're golden delicious apples. There's that underripe banana feel. There's grapiness in there. There is an effervescence, and it may be just subconsciously I'm going, well, it's from champagne class, it must be bubbly. But but I think that's the alcohol heat is giving this effervescence, this quite intense prickle kind of around my mouth and on my tongue. But there's a sort of there's a sweetness that's not sugary sweet, but it's like candies. It's like hard candies. It reminds me of, they're an American sweet, but they did come over here briefly, and I can't remember what the name of what we had when they were in the UK. Jolly Ranchers, but we also had, and it's more of like a 70s, it was slightly before my time. 70s and 80s, there was a hard candy kind of that were squares, and I can't remember what they were. All I've got in my head is Starburst, which they aren't that, because that's the new name for opal fruits, and they are like chewy, but there is I'm gonna have to stop. Oh, sorry about that. I had a delivery driver that wasn't going to go away, so I've had to take it in. Anyway, so there is there is this juicy candy feel, but it feels like a hard candy. It's slightly mouth-watering, but the alcohol content is it's just overpowering, just a little bit too much, which kind of surprises me. It's not that it's unbalanced, it feels almost like they've slightly kind of just not done it by mistake. It doesn't feel like it's deliberate that they've put it at that high alcohol content, but we'll see. Maybe it's cask strength, and so I'm going to put some drops of water in. Maybe it's cask strength, that's what it's come out at, but I'm not going to put a lot in. I've not got a lot in my glass, and because it feels quite, there's a light sweetness to it. This is not a deep whiskey, which is again kind of slightly different to what other Ardnamurchans have got. I really like the kind of the depth, the complexity, the rich feel of the core bottling, the batches that we've had up to now, the peated element. This feels lighter, so I don't want to put too much water in this, because I feel it's not going to take much to get it to the right level before you then start to over dilute it. So I've not put much in. This may have knocked it down to roughly 50%. I didn't put a lot in. Let's see how we go with this. That's better. It's still got a bit of a bite. There's a tiny little fly around here as well. Bugger off. It still has a bit of a bite, but it's working much better with the rest of the palate here. And it's allowing those fruity flavors to come through. Again, I'm getting that kind of hard candy. It's quite mouth-watering. There's grape and there's apple, and having added water to it, it's turned the apple from what was golden delicious, not quite Granny Smith's, but kind of halfway between the two. It's just a little bit more pronounced. That banana-iness is still there, but it's again mouth-watering. It's juicy. It's very, very fruit-forward. There's not a huge amount on the finish, but what there is lingering pleasantly. But it's one of those where peated elements, peated whiskey, sort of will naturally make the finish longer, because you've got that smoky element that, and I find personally, I tend to find finishes on peated whiskies tend to last longer because I'm more aware of that kind of smoky element that's lingering. This, I wouldn't say it's got a long finish, I'd say maybe a medium finish, but what there is actually really, really pleasant. That spice that's on the nose is there, but not as pronounced as it was. And again, nosing it with that water, that spiciness that was kind of lifting those fruit flavors up, I think it's the alcohol content in there as well is partly due to that. It's there, it's sort of softer. It's gone from dry cinnamon to slightly sweet cinnamon, you know. Not quite cinnamon buns with icing on top, but it's a slightly sweeter cinnamon touch of nutmeg in there as well. It's a very, very fruit-forward whiskey. It's very pleasant indeed. It's quite different to every other Ardnamurchan that I've had. But I like the fact that the distillery is showing this versatility. It's very interesting. I do think I'm picking up that kind of juicy grapiness, maybe subconsciously because I know it's come from a white wine cask. Or maybe it is that, you know, it is having a clear effect of there is this winey note, but it's if I was going to do a wine, it would be something like a Riesling, that sort of slightly off dry, slightly floral is influencing the spirit that is then gone into that cask. But it works. It works really, really well. It introduces a light, fruity, juicy, kind of like this hard candy note is from, I think, the wine casks. And it's very, very interesting indeed. Do I think it's better than the standard as a sort of a limited edition release? Do I think it's better than? No, it is different too. Personally, I think I prefer the peated element that they have in their core bottlings, what is now the core. I think for me, Ardnamurchan is a kind of light to medium peated coastal Highland whiskey. This goes in a very different direction, not massively so. It's a fascinating whiskey. It's really, really interesting. But if I were to try it blind, if somebody would give me a measure of this and didn't tell me what it was, I would never have picked Ardnamurchan. I'd just say, this is something really, really interesting. What is it? I don't honestly think I could pick what distillery it was from, which is kind of a good thing because it's standing on its own accord. It's not copying another distillery. But It's not Ardnamurchan, because I have this in my head, this Ardnamurchan house style, which has that peated element. But as something different, as something interesting, as something almost as an experiment, I think it's absolutely fascinating. And if you like whiskies that are doing something slightly unusual, something odd, something different, something a bit quirky, this is absolutely worth getting hold of, if you can get your hands on it.
The White Peak Distillery is based in Ambergate, Derbyshire, 12 miles north of Derby city centre. It was founded by Max and Claire Vaughan in 2016, who were following a dream for years of producing a single malt whisky in Derbyshire, despite no previous experience in the drinks industry. The distillery is sited in a 24-kilometre stretch of the Derwent Valley that was awarded UNESCO World Heritage status in 2001, within the old maintenance and store sheds of the Johnson and Nephew Wire Works that date back to 1876 and lasted for 120 years, which itself was rebuilt from a family-owned iron forge from the early 1800s. Initial spirit releases from White Peak included a range of gins and an agricole rum aged in ex-bourbon barrels, with their first single malt whisky release initially scheduled for launch in November in 2021. However, supply issues with the distinctive bottle that pays homage to the wire and cable produced by the old factory meant the first release was delayed to February 2022. The team employ a longer than average fermentation period and use 2 copper pot stills of 3,000 and 2,100 litres in volume. Water is sourced from the River Derwent immediately adjacent to the distillery, utilising some of the old pumping infrastructure for their condenser cooling system. Only English barley is used, and when I visited a couple of days before the launch of their first release, the team had begun a run of spirit that was using barley taken purely from Derbyshire itself.
Wireworks Small Batch is the third single malt whisky release from White Peak, following the inaugural first release and the distillery-only Over Smoke edition. Using a combination of 80% unpeated and 20% peated English barley, resulting in a phenol level of around 11 ppm, a 4-day fermentation period used a yeast blend incorporating live yeast sourced from the nearby Thornbridge Brewery. Spirit filled into first fill ex-bourbon, virgin oak and shaved, toasted and re-charred red wine casks that were all made from either American or French oak. A variety of ages averaging around 4 years were then selected for the batch, with predominantly STR casks being used, as well as a significant amount of ex-bourbon. 4,323 bottles have been released at an ABV of 46.2%, with no colour added or chill filtration taking place. So, it turns out that I still have a tiny little bit of first release left from when I decanted it. So, there might be the slight factor of a little bit of evaporation within the bottle. So, it might affect the flavour slightly. It's only been a couple of months, but it's quite low down in the bottle. So, there may be a bit of evaporation going on there, but we shall see. But let's do it side by side with, I thought I dribbled on my leg then, with the whiskey, not with my mouth. Let's see how it compares to the first release. Admittedly, it might not be the exact first release as if you open a fresh bottle, nevertheless. So, in terms of colour, for what it's worth, I mean, there's not much in it, if anything at all. I'm less bothered about colour nowadays. I found myself more interested in the aroma and the flavour profile than actually what it looks like. So let's go for the second. I'm going to call this second release by accident. I shouldn't do. This is small batch, and it's not the second release, it's the third. So on the nose, oh, there's a lovely fruitiness straight off the bat. There's kind of like summer fruit pudding, but there's a little bit of soft spice in there as well. There's a touch of nutmeg, a little bit of cracked black pepper, maybe like dried chili flakes, as well as that fruitiness. And that's possibly that little element of peated barley that's being used. There's a really nice fruitiness, and that was very much, I remember from recollection, prevalent on first release. So let's see if I've got it right. Interesting. Now, again, with the caveat that this is an open bottle that didn't have much left in the bottom, it might have maybe kind of evaporated a little bit within the bottle. But what's interesting is that fruitiness is there, but it's slightly fresher. On here, on the small batch, it definitely feels warmer, deeper, richer. There's like an extra dimension to it. There's a big fly buzzing around the place, and it's going to wind me up. Now, I've got one of these electric tennis rackets down here, but holding whiskey and swinging this around on camera, probably not a good idea. But rest assured, I'm going to get this little bastard at some point. Anyway, So the small batch feels like it's just got more to it. It feels richer, heavier, deeper, wider, harder, better, faster, stronger. It's just got more to it. But like I say, it might just be that I'm taking a sample from the bottom of the bottle in essence. But I love that fruitiness. It's very much red fruits. It kind of really feels like kind of summer fruit that's got strawberries and raspberries, but also black currants. There's a juicy element to it as well. There's cherries in there, but it's counterbalanced with this lovely kind of like subtle spiciness that's not overpowering, but is there. You know it's there. Right, on the palate. Oh, that initial mouthfeel is absolutely gorgeous. That summer fruit pudding feel really comes through. There's a kind of creaminess to it as well. The mouthfeel feels quite thick. And then interestingly, kind of halfway through, the spice element washes over. And you get a lovely kind of slight sea salt, cracked black pepper, touch of that dry chili flavour. Very much what's on the nose really comes through, but like ramped up to 11 on the palate. Again, not overpowering, not intense. It's got a youthfulness to it, which is accentuating the spicy notes. But the fruity character that's there and that mouthfeel, that rich, thick, I wouldn't say oily, it's a creamy mouthfeel, is very much there on the palate. I'm really, again, really impressed with this. Yeah, very fruity, very fruit forward, supported in the background initially by slightly drying spice that then comes to the finish, which then helps lengthen it, but that fruit element is still there. Now, I'm going to do the first release. So the small batch is 46.2%. The first release was 50.3. So we do have this higher alcohol element too. It might be that some of that's dissipated off with it being sat in the bottle for a bit, but let's go back to the first release. Lighter in terms of the mouthfeel. Again, very fruit forward. Again, summer fruits, that sort of feel. It doesn't feel as weighty, but I'm inclined to think that's because of how the spirit's been sat in the bottle. I'm inclined to think that because 50.3 on the first release, it doesn't feel like 50.3. I think we've had some evaporation within bottle that is just tempering it down, knocking it down slightly. So it's probably, to be honest, not a fair comparison for me to do this, because I'm not realistically comparing the small batch to first release as it is fresh out of the bottle. It's still delicious, don't get me wrong, but I have this feeling that it's been sat quite low down in the bottle for slightly too long, and some of that evaporation has taken place within the rest of the bottle that's there. So I'm going to put this down to finish later because it is still jolly tasty indeed. And let's just focus on what's going on in the small batch. For me, it's about the mouthfeel. For me, it's that rich, creamy, it's like summer fruit pudding with a big dollop of thick, like whipped fresh cream, where it's whipped to the point where it's kind of like it won't fall off, but you're getting peaks from it, and it's not like too thick, and it's delicious kind of like unctuous creaminess to it. But then you get that spice coming through as well, which is adding complexity, adding interest, not overpowering, working with that summer fruit, and just kind of like taking it to another stage. It's really good, this. It is quite summery, but actually I think you could, I've started to find kind of, when I've been drinking whiskies, I've been kind of not only using symphonies and orchestras and things in terms of tasting the flavour, but also going for a bit of kind of like seasonality in terms of like, this is a spring kind of whiskey. This is a, kind of imagining when the best time of year would be to try and drink this. And it's got that summer fruit feel that it would work really well. And I actually think lightly chilled in a garden in summer, there is enough of a fruitiness in it that you could quite easily enjoy this. But then that warm spice feel means that it would work as things start to get a little bit colder. So it's kind of a summer autumn whiskey. it's got enough warmth and richness to it, as well as the fruitiness, that it would work just as the nights are starting to draw in. So summer solstice was this week. Unfortunately, we are going to start to see that the nights are getting longer, the days are getting shorter, the weather's going to start getting crappy. Admittedly, it's going to be in a couple of months' time, but we've got that to look forward to, yay. And it will work as it starts to get a little bit chillier and as it starts to get a bit darker. It's not a winter whiskey. It's not one for me kind of like to keep warm in front of a log fire. There's too much a light fruity touch to it. A really, really good expression from White Peak. I've had some fantastic feedback from people that are drinking it. I think there is so much going on here that means that as the years go on, there is going to be some very, very interesting spirit coming out from them. It's different enough from the first release, I think, even kind of based on what I remember from when I drank it first, let alone compared to that slightly evaporated version that I've got now. It is moving in a slightly different direction. I think this is slightly fruitier. I don't think this has the smokiness that the first release had on it. I think we're going a bit more fruit forward. It's not a drastic change from the first release, and I've not yet opened my oversmoke. I'm going to kind of save that until the tasting. But there is a definite progression. And for me, it's very much on the mouthfeel. I do like that weight, that rich creaminess that's in there. So I think there is more to come from this distillery, but what they are already doing is already fantastic. I think it's absolutely brilliant. It's yet another tick in the box for English whiskey is doing some fantastic things here.
The Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery was founded in 2016 by Tom Mellor and David Thompson. Tom was an arable farmer who set up the Wold Top Brewery in 2013 and already had ideas about opening a whisky distillery in conjunction, and so partnered with long-standing friend and marketing expert David to set up the new spirit venture. The barley used for both beer and whisky production is grown on Tom's own fields, with milling, mashing and fermentation taking place at the brewery 4.5 miles away from the distillery itself. If the distillery was in Scotland, this would not be allowed due to Scotch Whisky Association regulations. In planning the distillery, Tom and David enlisted the help of legendary distillery consultant Jim Swan, who was well known around the world for assisting new distilleries such as Cavallan, Kilchoman, Penderyn and Lindores Abbey before his untimely death in 2017. The house style will ultimately be akin to the likes of GlenLyvis, fruit forward but somewhat delicate in body. The master distiller is a young man named Joe Clark. Joe's first job in the whisky industry was as a part-timer in the York branch of the whisky shop, at that time managed by none other than yours truly. His passion and enthusiasm was obvious from the very start, and he has worked tirelessly to ensure the early spirit releases from the distillery, under the brand name of Filey Bay, are of the highest quality. However, as is a legal requirement whenever I discuss Joe, I am obliged to show you this picture of Joe with our good friend Ollie Chilton of the Whisky Exchange during a trip to Islay. Feel free to ask him about the long hair, it's quite the story. In addition to 2 copper pot stills, a directional arm can connect to a 4-plate column still, which enables them to play around with reflux and redistillation. Maturation takes place principally in first fill ex-bourbon casks from Old Forester, although plenty of experimentation has been done with other cask types and finishing. Indeed, the current core range features a finish using Muscatel wine casks and an STR ex-Rioja cask finish. STR, or shaved, toasted and recharred, is a signature of Jim Swan's legacy. Filey Bay flagship, however, can be seen as the key introduction to the Filey Bay flavour profile, with light, fruity and creamy notes throughout. Unlike other recent new whisky distilleries across the UK, Spirit of Yorkshire never had any intention to delve into the massive gin or growing rum market, which would have given them an early and potentially lucrative revenue stream. The only concession they've made was the release of a whisky and malt spirit cream liqueur at the end of 2020, allowing visitors to their distillery who didn't drink whisky the chance to still appreciate their output. Spirit of Yorkshire don't use peat during the malting process, so the only way to introduce some kind of smoky flavour profile is to finish their whisky in casks that have previously held some kind of peated spirit. Bay Peated Finish Batch 2 uses casks sourced from an Islay distillery that is also a field to glass operation and the source of the barrels used in the inaugural Batch 1 release, and which may have also been mentioned earlier in this video. As before, it's not a specific partnership between Spirit of Yorkshire and the distillery in question, it just happens to be these were the best casks Joe could lay his hands on at the time of looking. Whereas Batch 1 used spirit that had been aged for around 3 to 3.5 years before the finish, Batch 2 uses slightly older stock of around 4 to 4.5 years old. No colour is added, no chill filtration takes place, and it's bottled at 46% ABV.
Okay, so I'm going to pour the samples. This is the peated finish batch 1, first one that came out last year. So as you're now aware, we are still using the same distillery for the peated finish. So it's the casks that have come from Kilchoman, which is more of a slightly ashy style. As a kind of like house style of Kilchoman, it's slightly more ashy smokiness rather than that medicinal style that you might find from the likes of Lefroy, Ardbeg, Lagavulin, that sort of thing. And that was certainly coming through on the batch 1, but we do have slightly older stock being used for the batch 2 as well, and it'll be really interesting to see whether that does make a difference or not. And obviously we're dealing with cask finishing, so as I mentioned, there is no peated barley being used, so Joe and his team don't have any control in essence as to what the smoky element is going to be like. They're not using the peated barley themselves. They're not able to kind of go to a malting house, or if they were malting it themselves, and go, right, we want kind of that level of ppm, and therefore the whiskey will taste like this, and we're going to make it consistently. You're still dealing with the vagaries of casks, the kind of weird alchemy that goes on, that even though we have lots of information about what goes on during cask maturation, there is this weird mystery still going on that you can put the same new make spirit in the same cask, pretty much from the same tree, in 2 different casks, and they're still going to taste slightly different. So then the influence of the peated whiskey that was in that cask then coming through onto the Filey Bay is going to have a factor that's somewhat unknown. And although there is a number of casks being used in the finishing process that Joe is then blended together, there is always the risk that it's going to be markedly different from the batch 1. So let's find out if that's the case. So that was the batch 2, this is the batch 1. Don't swap hand, right, batch 1, batch 2. In terms of colour, very little to tell between the two. I mean, to be honest, I'm not bothered about colour. Some people are, but I really couldn't give a monkeys about what it looks like. You know, I've had certain people go, oh, well, the darker it is, the peatier it is. No, that's not the case. No colouring's added all of this lot, but you know, in terms of the colour difference, it's not like if batch 2 was darker, I'd be going, oh, well, this is going to be absolutely different, and oh, I'm not going to like it, and all this lot, whatever. So anyway, let's start with batch 1, and let's see how we go with that. So on the nose, that light smokiness coming through, again, sort of citrus cream. It's beautifully balanced, but it's very gentle. And the smokiness that's there, it's almost like a slight wood smoke, dying embers of a bonfire. That sort of feel, that slightly ashy feel, a touch of salt on there as well. Okay, so the batch 2, interesting, slightly more pronounced actually. The baseline aromas, the type of smokiness that's in it, is still there. There's slightly less of the creaminess, slightly less of that lemon puff, lemon cream feel on the batch 2 than there is on the batch 1. The smoke element is a little bit more forward, not by a massive amount, but it's definitely a bit more pronounced. Again, ashy, embers of a bonfire, slightly more astringent, but astringent almost does it a disservice, because it's that the smokiness that's there is just slightly more intense. What was the saltiness on the batch 1 is more of a slight pepperiness on the batch 2. So straight away on the nose, there is not a massive difference, but there's more of a peated element, which people might be looking for on the batch 2. Right, batch 1, palate-wise. So initially, there's that classic house style of what is now the classic style of Filey Bay. Lemon cream, slightly biscuity, light, delicate, and then the smoke comes in kind of halfway through and is there on the finish. It's a soft smoke, again, slightly ashy, embers of a fire, but it works incredibly well with the citrus cream feel. It's soft, it's delicate, it's complex. The finish draws on for quite a while, but it's very gentle. It's very welcoming, but it's delicate, it's soft, it's fruity. And when I tried batch 1 to start with, I love the soft complexity that's there, but I do recognise that some people want more. They want more of that smokiness. You know, it really is a case of, well, I want peat coming through to it. But I love that subtlety, the subtle kind of harmony of flavours that are going on there. Right, so batch 2. Straight away, more intensity. Now, we're not talking, bang, you're drinking an Ardbeg 10-year-old, but instantly there is more of a smoke element. The lemon cream, citrus cream feel that's on the batch 1, that's there up front, is there, but very much more in the background. And here we have much more of a smoked oak note coming through. There's more of a bite. There's more of a kind of a sort of intensity in there. Now, it's still not, I wouldn't call it heavily peated by any stretch of the imagination, but this comes across as a lightly peated whiskey. Even though we're talking cask finish rather than peated barley that the distillery are using, this comes across as lightly peated, Bunnahabhain, that sort of feel. This is more kind of the medium peat level. This is not quite as intense as Kalila or Bamor, but getting to that stage. This, for me, the batch 1 is more kind of like a Bunnahabhain, soft, slightly sweet peat. This is getting more along the scale towards a Bamor and a Kalila, but maybe not quite hitting that intensity. Strangely, although I'm absolutely positive that batch 2 has older whiskey stock in before they put it into the cask for finishing than batch 1, if I was trying them blind and saying, right, which is the younger whiskey and which is the older, I'd actually put the batch 2 as younger whiskey with the batch 1 being older, simply because of the softer notes, the softer complexity that's in the batch 1, whereas the batch 2 it has more of a vigour to it, a more youthfulness. It feels younger because it feels like there's more bite, but it has more of that smoky element that I think people actually want. And I do think what I like about them is the fact that they are markedly different between the two, batch to batch. And I actually think that if you've tried the peated finish batch 1 and it wasn't enough for you, this is definitely getting to that stage. It's not massively intense, but it certainly has more of a smoky element that I think a number of drinkers were looking for from the first one. Yeah, it's definitely got... Now, that lemony creaminess is still there. It's pushed down a bit. It still works really, really well with that smokiness. That slightly dry, slightly ashy, burning embers of a bonfire. No medicinal element here. And I think if it did have a medicinal element, it might potentially be not quite working so well, not quite balancing so well with the citrus notes. But it's still excellent. It's still such a good combination of flavours. The finish, again, still goes on, arguably slightly longer because this has more intensity. But that combination of kind of citrus fruit, cream, smoke, soft smoke still, just works absolutely brilliantly. And it really comes across that the casks that he used for the finishing had more to give. They were, maybe it was a set of Kilchoman whiskey that had been in those casks that had actually been slightly higher peat levels than the ones that were used for the batch 1. I don't know, but they seem to have had more of an impact. There is more of a peated note in here. I'm wondering if that's a deliberate move by Joe, following feedback from people going, well, the peated finish, yes, it had some smokiness on it, but actually we want a bit more. And the general consensus was, can we have some more smoky element without going too overboard? Now, however long it takes for batch 3 to come out, it will be really interesting to see whether that develops even further. Because to be honest, I think the house style of Filey Bay, that kind of light, delicate citrus cream, lemon puff biscuits is what I always kind of liken it to. I do wonder if at a point of being involved with either peated barley or peated casks, it's so delicate that it will just get overblown by a smokiness. And actually you don't want to go too far. You know, if this gets any more intense, you're just going to lose that kind of Filey Bay element of it. But it feels like we are still moving in a really good direction, and the balance still works absolutely fantastic. Yeah, it does still really work. There is still, you get the Filey Bay element, but you get this element of smoke and peat and earthiness and spiciness and all sorts of things going on. So is it better than batch 1? No, it's as good. And batch 1 was fantastic, and this is fantastic. And what I love about this is that this is moving in a direction. It's taking things slightly differently in a direction that I think a lot of people will really like. Peated whiskey drinkers, I think, will actually, if you were to try the two side by side, prefer batch 2. I love batch 1 for its subtlety, its subtle complexity that's there. I have a feeling that more drinkers will prefer batch 2 because it's got a bit more oomph. How much more oomph it can take, if that's even a turn of phrase, would be very interesting to find out. You know, if you go for like a really kind of like really intense smokiness, is it just going to be too much? Are you just going to kind of lose the character of Spirit of Yorkshire in amongst all the smoke? Now, I've got a little bit of batch 1.
The Ardbeg Distillery was founded in 1815 by John McDougall on his family farm on the south coast of Islay, although evidence shows illegal distilling was taking place there for at least 20 years prior. It's located on the same road that also holds Lagavulin and Laphroaig, and all three distilleries are known for producing some of the peatiest whiskies in Scotland. As popular as it is now, the distillery wasn't always a success, being mothballed in 1981 and restarting again in 1989 on an intermittent basis, going silent once more in 1996. However, a year later it was purchased by GlenMorangie for £7 million, and who themselves would eventually be owned by Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy in 2004, who then began to rebrand Ardbeg and take advantage of the increasing popularity of smoky malt whiskies. Due to the limited availability of casks thanks to its checkered history, the first age statement release was actually a 17-year-old, and it wasn't until 2008 that the 10-year-old was launched. The Ardbeg portfolio contains a number of no age statement bottlings, which combine casks of various ages and types to maintain some kind of consistency in batches. Dr. Bill Lumsden was distillery manager of GlenMorangie from 1995 before becoming director of distilling, whisky creation and whisky stocks for both GlenMorangie and Ardbeg, and is considered the figurehead for continually experimental releases utilising different processes through production. Set up in 1999, the Ardbeg Committee is a fan club of sorts that offers members exclusive releases, normally on Ardbeg Day, which started on June 2nd, 2012. So popular were these limited edition bottlings that a second accompanying release started to become available for the general public through retailers worldwide, but more often than not, these were released at a lower alcohol strength. Ardbeg Ardcore is the Ardbeg Day bottling for 2022, using black malt barley, which they claim is a first for use in whisky. Used mainly for darkening the colour of beer, but not necessarily changing the flavour, the husk of the grain is often removed to reduce what would otherwise be a bitter note caused by the intense roasting needed to obtain such a dark colour. The Ardbeg Ardcore standard release is bottled at an ABV of 46%. The committee release is bottled at 51.8%. No chill filtration takes place, however it's not confirmed whether or not colouring is added.
Doesn't say anything about the cask maturation. It talks about the black malt barley, but it says nothing about what it's been matured in. And none of the bump I've read about it, the reviews, nothing talks about the casks. It all talks about the malt that's being used. So, you know, I'm guessing sherry casks, but I don't know because I can't find any evidence one way or the other to say what they've been in. Oh, an age statement. No age statement either. So this could be relatively young. If it's specifically with black malt, it could, I mean, this could be a combination of ages. Again, very, very little detail. Another one of these no age statements that I'm not expecting you to give me the age, but at least some indication of what the age range might be, the youngest to the oldest, or the average, or something. Just give us something rather than just puff, because it's not helping. It's not helping matters, and it doesn't make it any easier for me to sell to customers who want the trust in me that I know what I'm talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about with this because you don't give me any bloody information. So help us out, please, as in us retailers. Anyway, I'm very ranty this morning. Don't quite know what's going on. So, on the nose, classic, slightly marine-like, slightly oily, bonfirey, sweetness in there, kind of like charred caramel, slightly burnt caramel. There's sea salt, there's like salt and vinegar on chips and fish and everything like that. There's a soft ashiness, but there's an underlying sweetness all the way through. It's like brown sugar hit with a blowtorch, and it's kind of caramelizing and it's burning at the same time as well. Loads going on here, but it still feels quite light. Everything's medium to high notes. It feels like there's something missing underneath when I'm nosing it. It feels like there should be a weight that's kind of lacking. Everything, there's lots going on, and it is really, really enjoyable to nose. But it just feels like there's a depth and a weight that's just kind of missing from it. Anyway, let's go on to the palate. Straight away, barley sugar, and almost no smoke initially. That comes through in the back half. As you swallow, that's when that peat hits. Very soft, and again, very, very sweet. Very sweet indeed. We're now we've got a mouthful of that custard underneath the creme brulee with that burnt caramelized topping. I'm almost getting kind of like charred strawberries. This is really sweet. Really, really sweet. Very kind of brown sugar, toffee, butterscotch. The smoke itself is sweet. It's not quite barbecued meat. It's not quite barbecue sauce. It's toasted marshmallows on a barbecue. That charred outside that you get on a big marshmallow, and then that softness that's coming in here. What does it go on about on the label? Dark chocolate and brittle toffee. I get toffee, but I'm not sure I'd go brittle. It feels much softer. And the chocolatiness, maybe. It's very, very sweet though. But as with the nose, there's something missing underneath. It feels like, as I've got it in my mouth and as I'm swallowing it, everything's in the top half of my mouth. It's very light in weight. It feels like it's almost floating as it goes down. And it feels like it needs something heavier to really round everything off. It's really kind of throwing me. That second time there's a bit more of a bite as I swallow, so that might be just the way that I've swallowed it down. There's a bit more of a hit on the back of the throat. But again, the finish feels like it's on the roof of my mouth. Like literal smoke going up. There's nothing on the tongue. There's nothing on the sides of my mouth. There's no depth to it. It is good. There's lots going on with it still, as is its nature, as heavily peated whiskies will tend to have more going on because of the intensity of the flavours in there. But it really feels like there's a weight missing, and I'm wondering whether it's just because it's 46% as opposed to 51.8. I do wonder whether the higher ABV that's been released for the committee is actually going to give you that heavier feel, that weight that I think is just going to add an extra dimension that's really going to make things much more interesting. As it is, it doesn't feel particularly Ardbeggy. It just feels like it's a good, heavily peated Islay whiskey. So am I disappointed with it? Sort of. It feels like it's lacking something that could really elevate the whole whiskey. But what there is good. I like the sweetness to it. I can imagine it's going to be a bit too sweet for some people because it's very marshmallowy. It's very toffee, caramel, soft, runny caramel. Don't get so much of the dark chocolate that they go. The bitterness isn't so much there of like a dark chocolate. It's very, very easy drinking for a heavily peated whiskey, because there'll be some people that will try that and go, how can you even put that in your mouth? Steady. But yeah, personally, it feels like there is a level to this whiskey whether it just needs to be slightly higher ABV, which is why they've done it for the committee, or I don't know, maybe slightly more influence of a slightly richer sherry cask or something. It just feels everything's light and floaty, and it just feels like it needs kind of weighing down a little bit, and then it will be an absolute blinder. It doesn't scream out punk. It doesn't feel intense enough to be punk. It doesn't feel heavy enough to be punk. It feels a bit too light and fluffy to have all this punk paraphernalia kind of going around it. But that's by the by.